Hello everybody, Michael here for Tactica Imperialis. Just before we get started with today's video, I just want to thank you all again for 10,000 subscribers. I can't believe I'm saying that still. This was the original plan for the 10,000 subscriber special, all the way back since we hit 5,000 back in November. I knew I wanted to do a really important character or event for 10,000. And that, of course, who else but the Emperor of Mankind himself. It just seemed apt. So, that's what we plan to do, and I wanted it to fall after the Legions miniseries because I didn't want to interrupt the flow of that series, and as it's turned out, it's fallen out absolutely perfectly. It's flowed perfectly almost to finish just after the Legions miniseries. It's finished a little bit late, the series, but I didn't want to interrupt the order this late in the day. So I put out the 10,000 subscriber part 1 battle report, which if you haven't seen it, I'll put a link in the description below. But this is really the 10,000 subscriber special. This is the 40k stories for the Emperor of Mankind, and I really hope I've done him justice. This is a character that is probably the most important character in all of 40k. If not the most important character, period, then definitely the most important for the Imperium. He is, well, he's the Emperor. What else do I need to say? I hope I've done him justice. It's a tough one to do sometimes because there's a lot of theory crafting goes into how the Emperor works because, well, his origins are a little bit mysterious. You'll find out more about that when I finish rambling. But I hope I've got it right, and I hope that my theory crafting gives you some inspiration to come up with some ideas of your own. So, I won't ramble on any longer. Enjoy the official 10,000 subscriber special, part 2, technically. This is 40k Stories for the Emperor of Mankind. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis. Thank you all for watching, and thank you all again for 10k. I'll see you all again. Bye for now.
Humanity has lived amongst the stars for millennia, through ages of glorious innovation and nightmarish collapse. Yet in this modern age of eternal war, it is only through the actions of one individual that they continue to survive. It is his creations that form the elite of his Imperium's military, his will that directs the beacon that guides his navy through space, and his prodigious psychic abilities that keep the powers of the warp at bay. He was the one to drag humanity out from the darkness of the age of strife, uniting the race under the imperial truth in the Great Crusade. Though his physical body was broken at the climax of the Horus Heresy, his mind endures to this day, and in the eyes of his subjects he has transcended to godhood despite his wish for a secular Imperium. He is the creator of the Astartes, the Custodes, the Astronomicon, and the Imperium at large. Though none know his name, nor his true origins save himself, he is known all but universally to the inhabitants of the galaxy and those beyond it. Referred to by demonkind as the Athenema, he is the Emperor of Mankind, and this is what we know of his story. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to a very special 40k Stories. The origins for the being that would become known as the Emperor are shrouded in an impenetrable veil of mystery. It's said only the Emperor remembers, and, well, he's not exactly the chattiest these days. There is one tale that at least allows us to suggest a chain of events in the Emperor's early life, dating back to around 7 or 8,000 BC. It states that the Emperor is not in fact a single being in the strictest sense. His soul is an amalgam of the souls of the human psychers known as shamans. It is said that these shamans were powerful in the arts of the warp, capable of reincarnating their souls upon death, but they had perceived the threat that chaos would one day pose to humanity. It said the chaos gods were growing at this time, though it may have simply meant that they were dormant, as they didn't awaken to humans at least until something like M2. And this was like M-8 or something. The shamans decided to preemptively counter this by combining their souls in a mass suicide, forming the soul of the future emperor who was born by conventional means a year later in what was, according to legend, known in ancient times as Turkey. It may be that something other than this occurred. Perhaps he was a freak mutation, the first dabbling hand of chaos to corrupt humanity with a psychogene, or many other variant ideas. But he came into existence almost certainly by being born. His psychic abilities developed as a youth, and he used them as a teenager to kill his uncle, who had in turn killed his father. It is said in his own words, in fact, that this was the original catalyst for the future emperor to realize that humanity would need an overall ruler and law, though he didn't take it upon himself to do so at the time. Instead, he seemed to retreat into obscure anonymity, guiding humanity from the shadows in an eternal vigil whilst developing his psychic powers. He did not show himself at all during the Age of Terra, when humanity first began to enter the stars, but was blissfully unaware of the warp as they had yet to discover it. This period ends in around M15. It was thought during this development that he became aware of chaos just like the shamans once had, and took it upon himself to guard humanity from the horrors of the warp, along with the various xenos they were likely discovering. However, he wasn't above working with the ruinous powers, even if it was only to turn upon them later, as it was through the Chaos Gods themselves that he gained his incredible abilities that took him from a powerful human psyker to almost godlike, but not a god, he was always very clear on that. During the Dark Age of technology, he travelled along with a human perpetual called Olivia Surica, as well as others like her, to the planet of Malak. While I have no date for this, it is known that the warp was first discovered in M18 or so, and so thus it must have been between then and M25 when the Age of Technology ended. There he entered the warp via a portal that had seemingly always been on the planet, brokering some sort of deal with the Chaos Gods to claim a portion of presumably their own power. What the terms were is unclear, but I get the feeling it would involve selling out humanity to Chaos in some way. With this newfound power, the Emperor would be able to go on and create the Primarchs, among other things, but he had no intention of holding up his dark bargain. I'm curious as to why the Chaos Gods were unable to punish him for that, though later actions may suggest they eventually did do so. With his purpose on Malak served, the Emperor fell off the grid once again, though I suspect he teleported himself back to Terra, as the ship that brought him and the Perpetuals out there was one way. The Perpetuals were left to guard the gate and were almost able to seal it and prevent Horus from repeating the Emperor's actions during the Horus Heresy. He would not appear openly at all until the Age of Technology had long since finished, and the Age of Strife was well underway. But it's suspected that it is in this period that he discovered or built the Golden Throne. Oddly enough, he could not recall or would not disclose whether he had designed it or had the original idea, or whether the discoveries he made in Asia's deserts served as inspiration. One might say that this was the beginning of the Imperial Webway project. The Emperor had decided that the best defense against the warp was to cut humanity off from it entirely, and using the Webway was his planned alternative. I think the eventual goal was to make them a psychic race that never relied on the warp at all, which makes not much sense, but there you go. Whether he originally planned to complete it before revealing himself is unknown, but he did not do so. Terra had been consumed by war between the techno-barbarian clans, and the solar system was surrounded by warp storms, potentially caused by the development and or birth of Slaanesh, and the Emperor resolved to bring humanity under his rule for the first time, something like 40,000 years after he'd first come up with the idea. Suppose being almost immortal means you don't get senile or forgetful in old age. Everything has its perks. The future Emperor revealed himself to humanity on Terra, launching a campaign of conquest that became known as the Unification Wars. Alongside him were the Legio Custodes and the Thunder Warriors, predecessors to the Space Marines who brought bloody ruin whenever they were unleashed. Sometimes this was unnecessary, as many of the techno-barbarian empires submitted to him willingly, but whether through war or words, Terra was brought together and unified under the Emperor's rule. It's unclear exactly how long the Unification Wars went on, but it may well have taken over a century. There were two finales in a way to the Unification Wars. The final region brought to compliance was seemingly frank, though it's implied this was a rebellion rather than a conquering, as a force of Thunder Warriors massacred a militia 10 times more numerous. However, that was also the last battle for the Thunder Warriors as well, as the Legio Custodes and the first of the newly created Astartes culled them in the battle at Mount Ararat. The reasons for this are not always clear, but it's believed that the Thunder Warriors were far more savage than the Astartes and were thus poorly suited to conquering the galaxy as opposed to slaughtering it. Or it may have been that it was just easier to mass produce the Space Marines, not that the Emperor could do that yet either. With the Thunder Warriors gone and the war over, the Emperor turned his attention from the military to religion. The imperial truth and atheist doctrine extolling science, logic, and human superiority was spread to the populace whilst the various churches and religious buildings were destroyed. The last to go was the Christian Church of the Lightning Stone, burned to the ground under the Emperor's personal supervision. During this post-Unification Wars period, construction began on the Imperial Palace, built assumedly over the Golden Throne in the Himalaya mountain range. It's also believed that the territory had once been the home of the Sigillites, the order to which Malkador supposedly belonged. He'd popped up at the Emperor's side as an advisor in the war, but no one knows where he came from either. Luna, Terra's moon, was next in line for conquest, with its gene labs being swiftly taken by the nascent Legiones Astartes, the future Lunar Wolves, Ultramarines, and Imperial Fist, and it was here that the Primarchs would supposedly be born. Yes, the Space Marines, according to this logic, came before the Primarchs, apparently. Don't ask, don't know, doesn't make much sense, suspect someone got their wires crossed. The Emperor was able somehow to clone the power he had received from the Chaos Gods on Malak and imbued it into the Primarchs, but assumedly as a form of payback for him turning his back on them, the ruinous powers scattered them across the galaxy. Many who know of this event might wonder why the gods didn't kill the Primarchs, or why the Emperor suddenly didn't make more after losing the initial batch. But whatever their reasons, it happened, and one of the objectives for the following Great Crusade was to bring them back. Mars and the rest of the Sol system were brought into the new Imperium of Man in relatively short order, and for the next 200 years, the Emperor and the gradually returned Primarchs brought the galaxy to compliance. As far as we know, the Emperor met all of the Primarchs save Alpharius Omegon personally on or around their homeworlds, though as we've discovered in our Legionary adventures, not all of them went willingly at first. Looking at you, Angron, Russ, Vulcan, Mortarion, Manus, quite a few actually. Initially, the Emperor played a very active role in the Great Crusade in terms of both administration and war. He personally ran the Imperial War Council alongside Malkador, the Fabricator General of the Mechanicum, the Primarchs, and his chief bodyguard, Captain General Constantin Valdor of the Custodes, though honestly, calling it the War Council was an understatement since it basically ran the entire Imperium and Great Crusade. He also touched the battlefield at least a few times, always winning or saving the day, but not always comfortably. He had to be saved from being throttled to death by a massive augmented orc war boss in the Battle of Goro, with Horus Lupercal proving his saviour as payback for the Emperor covering the wounded Primarch in the Siege of Raylis. Gradually, however, the Emperor began to step away from the front line of the Crusade. About 200 years after it began, the Emperor declared the triumph of Ulanor, promoting Horus to War Master and passing leadership of the War Council over to him. At the same time, civilian management of the Imperium was given over to the Council of Terra, run by everyone on the War Council that wasn't a Primarch, along with representatives of the other human factions like the Imperial Army and the Navis Nobilite. This was the predecessor to the High Lords of Terra and proved a great source of annoyance to the Primarch, since, well, they weren't on it. The Emperor would spend his time on Terra occupied with the Imperial Webway project from then on, either finishing what he had started when he found the Golden Throne, or finally implementing what he'd been planning. Of course, he told no one outwardly what he was doing, which further drove a wedge between him and his sons. Actually, sons is the wrong word. The Emperor never saw the Primarchs as children, viewing them more as creations, even if they looked at him as a father. I believe the analogy he made was something like Pinocchio, whatever that ancient Terran reference is. The reasons why he never talked about what he was doing is kind of ambiguous. Most believe it's because he didn't want anyone knowing what chaos was as a reason for why he was using the Webway, but without getting it straight from the horse's mouth, we can't be sure. The Webway project seemingly took up much of the Emperor's attention, since he, well, gave up running the Imperium to do it, but it wasn't his only task. The Emperor's psychic abilities continually powered the Astronomicon, a psychic beacon within the warp constructed on Terra before the Great Crusade even began. Presumably it was built between the end of the Unification Wars and the departure of the Crusade from Sol. With it, Imperial ships and their navigators could traverse the warp far more safely, which made the Great Crusade, well, possible. And while powering it 24/7 was probably nothing more than a background job, it was still something the Emperor had to do. He also returned to the public stage on at least one occasion, presiding over the Council of Nicaea that saw the Librarius of the Legiones Astartes disbanded. Other than that, no, the Emperor retreated into his work and left the running of the Imperium to his subjects. Whether he planned to retake centre stage after the Webway project was finished, we will sadly never know. Following the corruption of Horus by Chaos on Davin, Magnus the Red attempted to warn the Emperor of the War Master's impending betrayal. Unfortunately, his psychic communication, potentially due to Tzeentch's hand at work, broke through the barriers the Emperor had erected around the Webway project, damaging it irreparably and opening warp rifts throughout it known collectively as Magnus's Folly. In response to this, the Emperor ordered Magnus to be arrested by Leman Russ of the Space Wolves. After all, Magnus had violated the decree of Nicaea in order to send his message, and thus regardless of its contents, the Crimson King needed to be censured. It said the Emperor actually ignored Magnus, such was his anger and distress at the Primarch's actions. However, the still believed loyal Horus, really should learn to check your messages, Emperor, was able to intercept the order and change it, leading to the burning of Prospero that we've discussed in the past. The damage to the Webway was so severe that the Emperor was confined to the Golden Throne throughout almost the entirety of the Horus Heresy that followed, using it to keep the warp from engulfing all of Terra. This took, I assume, even more of his attention than working on the project has done, though he was still able to communicate and keep the Astronomicon ticking over even if he delegated the management of the heresy to Malkador and Rogel Dawn. During this time, Corvus Corax came to Terra after the Dropset massacre on Istvan V, and the Emperor shared with him the knowledge required to create the Astartes, allowing the Raven Guard Legion to rebuild, at least until the Alpha Legion got involved anyway. Whilst he fought to keep control of the warp, the Custodes and Sisters of Silence led the defence of the webway for 5 grueling years against demons and traitors alike, but even the elite of humanity's armies could not hold forever. As the demon Dratnien entered the fray, the Emperor realised that the war within the webway was coming to its climax, and bade the Silent Sisterhood gather 1,000 Psykers in an action called the Unspoken Sanction. Their sacrifice allowed the Golden Throne to be powered without the Emperor for a single day, and this allowed the Lord of Mankind to enter the webway and make time for a full Imperial evacuation. The Emperor then rushed back to the Golden Throne and would not leave it again until the end of the heresy, resuming his duty of keeping the warp at bay. He spoke to a custodian, the seemingly highest-ranking survivor of the war in the webway since Captain General Valdor wasn't involved, and he said that the failure of the webway had doomed humanity, no matter how long it may take. Given the Cabal would say something similar to Alpharis Omegon, he probably was right, but it's yet to truly happen, so we can't really be sure. Though he knew he would strike Horus down, the War Master would be replaced, and for the first time in his long, long life, the Emperor admitted he didn't know what to do. This implies that the damage to the webway by Magnus was unforeseen by the Emperor whilst everything else was, which is backed up by the belief that the Emperor had already planned for the Horus Heresy or some Primarch-led rebellion, but that Magnus was the sole unknown, a wildcard as it were. Many also believe that Magnus was the one fated to sit on the Golden Throne rather than the Emperor had everything gone to the plan. So the fact he wasn't and his father was would be a clear indicator that something hadn't followed the script for once at the very least. Another interesting conversation that shows the Emperor's mindset came following the escape of elements of the Crusader host known as the Outcast Dead. This one was held telepathically with an astropath, who shared with the Lord of Mankind his visions concerning the heresy's end. We assume these visions to be truthful, as during the conversation the Emperor stated that he knew and accepted his fate already, implying in turn that the Emperor had already envisioned how everything would play out, besides, of course, Magnus. Late in the day, the Emperor gathered Malkador and his group of individuals that had been brought together as knights-errant or human agents, laying the foundations for the Inquisition and the Grey Knights. Some believe the Grey Knights' gene seed comes from the Emperor himself, but it is unconfirmed. When the traitor forces arrived to besiege Terra and the Imperial Palace, the Emperor was forced into absence for much of the battle, but when Horus lowered his ship's void shields in a challenge and trap, the Lord of Mankind left control of the Golden Throne to Malkador and teleported aboard with Sanguinius, Dawn, and many others. He reached the bridge to find Sanguinius dead, slain by Horus who had himself gained the Emperor's power on Malak. The corrupted War Master saw his father as a tyrant seeking godhood, despite his supposed plans for a secular and free humanity, and the two fought, but the Emperor supposedly held back from unleashing his full power. This allowed Horus to gain the upper hand and do likely fatal damage to him, but as he went to strike the Emperor down for good, either a custodian or the human Alanius Pius, sources say both and often conflict for some reason, charged the War Master who contemptuously obliterated them. This showed the Emperor that Horus truly had fallen beyond all hope, and he unleashed his psychic abilities through his son's heart. Realizing their failure, the Chaos Gods abandoned Horus, who snapped into sanity and begged for death lest he be corrupted again. The Emperor complied, blasting Horus's soul to nothing just as the forces under Rogel Dawn finally arrived. They brought the mortally wounded Emperor back to Terra and interred him on the Golden Throne as Malkador's body disappeared into dust from the exertion of controlling it. The Emperor had given Dawn strict instruction to put him on the now modified throne, which would serve as life support as much as it would power conduit for the rest of his days. Whether any further orders were given before the Emperor finally fell silent is unknown, but he has remained interred on the Golden Throne for the past 10 or 11,000 years, the running of his once great Imperium left to the Primarchs and his other subjects. Since the Emperor's internment on the Golden Throne, his body has atrophied with the passage of time to the point he's likely not much more than a skeleton to the untrained eye. However, thanks to the throne, his mind has been incredibly well preserved, along with a measure of his prodigious psychic abilities. Well, some say it's kind of shattered, but, better than dead. Even in his state of what I can only call undeath, the Emperor continues his vigil over the fractured webway project, keeping the warp at bay like he has done ever since it broke into the labyrinthine dimension. This is just as hard, if not harder, than it was 10,000 years ago, especially with the Emperor being weakened, and so a measure of his duties have been delegated. He does not power the Astronomicon anymore. That job falls to 10,000 psykers recruited by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica and then drafted into the Adeptus Astronomica specifically for the task, whilst the Emperor simply directs the beacon's guiding light. 100 psykers a day die in the process of conducting their work, but that figure pales compared to the number killed by the Golden Throne itself. Thousands are sacrificed every day just to keep the arcane device running, and the number required is only increasing. It's increased fourfold on the original value by early M41 and has likely risen further since. Compounding the problem is the fact that the Adeptus Mechanicus' tech priests have found flaws in the Golden Throne now beyond their ability to repair, forcing a desperate bargain to be struck with the Dark Eldar of all people. What the deal entails is sadly unknown, but when the Drukhari are involved, I can only worry. Despite the strain he is under, however, the Emperor is not powerless. He has been known to grant visions to some of his subjects, though how often is unclear since many claim to have received them, and he's said to be able to guide them through sheer force of will. He also is said to manipulate the 78 psychoactive cards known as the Emperor's Tarot, a form of divination said to have been designed by the Emperor himself. Helps to keep the Imperium informed to some extent, I suppose. In all truth, however, the biggest change for the average Imperial citizen at least is the deification of the Emperor. Many Emperor-worshipping cults had sprung up during the Great Crusade, most infamously including the now treacherous Word-Bearers Legion, and the number only multiplied following his internment on the Golden Throne. The one that survived and flourished the best was the Temple of the Saviour Emperor on Terra, which gradually absorbed the other cults before becoming the Imperial state religion sometime in M32 as the renamed Adeptus Ministorum. I can only imagine how annoyed this must make the Emperor these days. Even though the majority of the Space Marines do not believe in the God Emperor as he is now known, the resurrected Roboute Guilliman has been doing a lot of thinking on whether it was actually the truth, intended or not. Guilliman was permitted audience with the Emperor following his return to Terra, and though none know what was said between the avenging son and his father, it seems to have been implied that the Emperor has lost much of his humanity over the millennia. Guilliman believes him now to be cold and callous, though he can't be completely without his humanity as he still uses his abilities for the good of his species. Whether he is truly a god, and what sort of god he is, will likely go unresolved for the rest of time, but some believe that the Emperor's millennia-long undeath can perhaps be reversed. Perhaps the most commonly held theory is that of the Star Child, something akin to the newly birthed Eldari god Iniad, in that it is an entity forming in the warp. Since the shamans that supposedly formed the Emperor could reincarnate their souls, it's thought that he could do the same if he were to die, which of course he can't at the moment thanks to the Golden Throne. This soul seed, the Star Child, is either growing or waiting for the Emperor's death. The Terminus Decree held by a Grey Knight is believed to be a component of this, as it bears a seal only replicated on the Golden Throne, which makes some think it's designed to turn the throne off and allow the Emperor's rebirth. This is, of course, as heretical a thought as it gets, and in that time of resurrection, it's worth pointing out that Terra would be destroyed as the warp overran it, and thus the Astronomicon would go out permanently. So, it's not a perfect plan, but then some believe that the Golden Throne is an infinity circuit with the Psykers' souls that are sacrificed to power it, firing up the Star Child. So, it gets a little bit complicated, believe it if you like. An alternative is presented, or rather kept hidden, by the Illuminati, a mysterious group said to have allowed themselves to be possessed before exorcising the demon in question. They are gathering individuals known as the Sensei, believed to be descendants of, or actually the Emperor's own mortal children, keeping them safe from the Inquisition who see them as mutants and heretics. They're also powerful psykers that are safe from demons etc. due to being invisible to the powers of chaos. I suppose that's what the Emperor wanted for the species at the end of the day. The Illuminati wish to sacrifice the Sensei to renew the Emperor, though the Sensei themselves are supposedly seeking a form of apotheosis with the Star Child in a similar manner to demon princes, without the chaos elements. Odd, but true. Ish. Whether they're right or not is unknown to probably everyone save maybe the Emperor, and somehow I doubt we'll ever find out either way because it would require... Yeah, let's not even go there. As it is, the Emperor will continue his eternal watch over mankind, guiding and protecting them as best he can until the Golden Throne finally fails or he somehow transcends it. So ends the tale of the Emperor of mankind. Man, God, or something in between, the Emperor has done his utmost to guide humanity for potentially tens of thousands of years. Through his will and abilities, his species has developed into a star-spanning empire with powerful armies and technologies, capable of traversing the realm of chaos and keeping its denizens at bay. His road has not been smooth, especially in more recent times with his internment on the Golden Throne and his almost death at the hands of his son Horus. But without him, there would be nothing to stop chaos from consuming the galaxy and wiping humanity out. Whether he will one day return to lead his people personally is likely to be an eternal debate, but in his absence he is deified by the Imperium as their shield and protector. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the story of the most powerful of your species likely to ever live. I hope you enjoyed and were illuminated by it. I have a few stops left to make before I leave Terra and Sol once more and head back into the galaxy at large. Since I'm here, I may as well look at some of the other Imperial authorities stationed on the cradle of humanity and its nearest neighbours. If you thought the Emperor's tale was a shadowy one, then I think our first faction should be just as, if not more, mysterious. Also, we've finished our look at the Legiones Astartes, so as always feel free to forward suggestions to our mutual friend via his usual channels for what else we should explore. For now though, it is time to end. Thank you all so very much for watching. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I will see you all again. Goodbye.